Hi, Ko and Andi.
Hi.
Thank you so much for joining us remotely and bearing with us during all of this craziness. We're really excited to have you, even if it's over the interwebs. Um, so we just got out of, we were doing a little bit of a creative reflection in a different Zoom hangout. So everyone's migrating over here. I think we have like 95% of us in the room. We have two students that are going to give you a little bit of an introduction, and then they also have some prepared questions for you at the end, but then we'll open it up to kind of a wider Q&A. And maybe I can just have everyone give just a virtual round of applause for our speakers, and I'll hand it over to the students to do the introductions. Okay.
Hi, this is Xuan.
Hi, this is Andi.
And so since we are not physically in DSI, we actually wrote a statement to welcome you both. And here it starts. So for Andi and Campbell and Ko, welcome to DSI, a grand building located on 136 West 23rd Street. We are now presenting from Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo, the biggest and the largest classroom in DSI, with 132 students joining us today. Our tech sport, Indiana, is recording from the back of the classroom. We thank him for participating while working as one of the states in this country. Good job, Indiana. After the class ends, you can find our histogram page by searching DSI, the Design for Social Innovators and Future Leaders. You'll find the information about this lecture. So everyone, happy Fool's Day. So Andi and I will introduce our guests next.
Yeah, happy Fool's Day. Now I want to introduce the two speakers. One is Andi Broffman. Andi Broffman is a portfolio manager from Continental project on the Build Up for Zero team. She holds an MPA in Environmental Science and Policy from Columbia University and a BA in Psychology from NYU. After she graduated from NYU in 2009, Andi Broffman worked for Community Solution on the 100,000 Homes campaign. Andi then decided to combine her passion for social justice with her study of environmental sustainability. From 2012 and 2015, she worked as a programs manager, accounts manager, and consultant in different firms in different countries. She went back to Community Solution and used her 5 years of experience working with communities to improve their local homelessness serving systems. Andi is now helping to identify and structure opportunities in new space to accelerate the work for the Build for Zero team in meeting strategic aims. Together, they are providing that moral courage, data-driven thinking, and a system-wide approach can build a future where homelessness is rare overall and brave when it occurs.
Our another guest today is Ko Campbell. She works as the large city strategy lead on Community Solution Build for Zero team. In this capacity, she and a group of system transformation advisors assist a cohort of 7 large U.S. communities to strengthen system and test ideas, transform house landscape, and reduce or end veteran homelessness. Prior her work with the large cities cohort, Ko worked as an improvement advisor for Build for Zero and the 25 Cities Initiative, where she provided strategic support to build for by name list, analyze system data, and run quality improvement projects, which I personally is very interested in, especially while coming to like collecting data for like people experiencing homeless. Grew up on Lookout Mountain, Tennessee. She graduated from Pomona College in 2008 with a degree in English literature and an MA from Columbia University. She's very interested in Harlem, which I think might resonate with some of our cohort. So welcome our guests today.
everyone so much cooler than we are.
I know. This is very easily the warmest welcome I think we've gotten in a very long time, if we've ever gotten so warm a welcome. And I've never gotten a virtual applause before. This is a first. Thank you.
Yeah, same. So I'm going to kick us off here just to say back to you all, thank you so much for inviting us to your virtual classroom today to talk about Built for Zero. We were going to introduce ourselves, but you all did a much better job than I imagined we would have anyway. So I would just like to get us right into the content. We've got a bunch of slides for you. I think we'll go at a good clip here, but it sounds like there's going to be time for questions at the end, which we certainly look forward to answering. So I just want to start with a little bit of background on what Built for Zero is. Built for Zero is an initiative that sits within Community Solutions, the nonprofit organization that Kao and I work for. It's a national change effort, and we're really focused on supporting a group of communities in the United States that are committed to ending homelessness for veterans who are experiencing that, as well as people who are experiencing chronic homelessness. And chronic homelessness is really just a HUD term for people who are experiencing long-term homelessness or repeated instances of homelessness along with a disabling condition. Move us along here? Sure. So the initiative itself launched in 2015. And since that time, we have had the opportunity to support an ever-expanding and contracting network of communities across the country. And 11 of those have ended veteran homelessness, and 3 of those communities have ended chronic homelessness. We actually have some communities who have done both, which is a really amazing accomplishment.
Hey, Andy.
Yes.
I think some folks are having a little bit of a hard time hearing. Is it just Andy, or do you have a hard time hearing me also?
Kao, you sound pretty good, Andy. I don't know if you can get closer to your mic.
I'm also wondering if I should just dial in on my phone instead of using. Yeah. Kao, do you wanna?
I'm happy.
Awesome, thanks. I'll be right back.
To go through.
Sorry.
Will you actually? Is it possible for me to share my screen?
Yeah.
Okay. Otherwise, I won't be able to click through.
Okay, I'm gonna stop.
Great. Here we go. Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
All right, hold on one second. There we go. And if you guys will just remind Andi to interrupt me when she comes back, because I won't be able to see that she's back. So this slide is about the successes we've seen so far in Built for Zero communities, and we have this slide really early in the presentation because sometimes when we start talking to folks about communities trying to end homelessness, they have a really hard time believing that that could be possible. Of the about 90 communities that are in the collaborative right now, 11 of them have ended veteran homelessness and 3 have already ended chronic homelessness. 42 of them have received measurable reductions, and we'll talk more about what it actually means to end and what it means to achieve a measurable reduction later on. But 72 of the almost 90 have already achieved quality real-time data on homelessness, which I'll also talk through later. And we just show this early on to give you some kind of insight into the fact that while it seems really far off and hard to do, there are communities already that have started having success in ending homelessness. We also start this presentation just by explaining how homelessness is a complex problem, specifically thinking about 3 different types of problems. There are technical challenges, and feel free to interrupt me if you guys have heard this explanation before, but there are technical challenges, complicated challenges, and complex challenges. Technical challenges are like baking a cake. If you have all the right ingredients and you have the right equipment, like if you have an oven, if you have a timer, if you have all the right mixing bowls, you can make that cake over and over and over again. Complicated problems seem really different. They're like launching a ship into space. While shooting a ship into space is much more difficult than baking a cake, if you have all the right equipment and you have you have the steps that you can follow. It may be much harder to source the ingredients and to find the equipment, but you can actually still send a rocket into space over and over and over again, just like baking a cake. I'm going to turn it over to Andi for complex.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me more
Yes.
clearly now? Great. Complex problem solving tech challenges on the fly. But in all seriousness, we consider homelessness to be a complex challenge, and we would put it up there in the same category as raising kids, addressing climate change, also a global outbreak, which is really hitting close to home these days. When we talk about a complex problem, what we mean is that it is emergent. So there's new information all the time. The conditions within which we are considering it are changing. No one single actor can solve a complex challenge. I think we're seeing that right with the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as homelessness. Rings true for climate change as well. And there's just so much information all of the time, and so many different people inputting into the conversation. So we like to categorize homelessness as a complex problem, which basically means you cannot follow one recipe. You have to be responding to the changing information and the changing landscape around you. Keo, do you want to pop it to the next slide? Thanks. So I think the other thing that's interesting about a complex problem is that you might try something and think that you're headed in the right direction, and it turns out that perhaps you aren't. And you know, spoiler alert, that occurred for us at Community Solutions. So the organization has really been around since 2010, and our mission has always been to end homelessness. And so in 2010, we actually launched a first initiative, and we called it the 100,000 Homes Campaign. And what we did was invite communities across the country to participate in, again, another national effort where we were basically looking at the national numbers of people who were experiencing homelessness and saying, if we house about 100,000 of those folks, we believe that we would make a dent in the number of people across the country that were experiencing homelessness. And the only thing that mattered to us, the only metric that we cared about, was monthly housing placements. So how many individuals who are experiencing homelessness can your community system move into housing on a month-by-month basis? And at the end of the campaign in 2014, what we did see was that the 186 communities that had participated with us were hugely successful. We housed or supported communities in housing over 105,000 individuals. But what we also saw was that even though the communities had made huge efforts in making their housing systems more efficient, there was not a comparable reduction in the overall number of people experiencing homelessness as it was measured nationwide. And so we like to call this our pivot moment, essentially, which made us hit pause on the work that we were doing and revisit the nature of this complex problem to try to think about how we should move forward, since our first hypothesis about how we would work to see communities end homelessness did not bear the results that we thought that it would. And so we realized that if what we said that we wanted to do was end homelessness, instead of counting up the number of housing placements that communities could deliver on each month, we really had to focus on the outcome measure that we actually stated we wanted to see, which was getting to zero. And so when we launched Built for Zero, we recognized that what it would take was to understand month over month the number of people who were experiencing homelessness in a community, and to work to drive that number down from whatever it was at the moment the community started working with us to zero. And you'll see that represented here as those orange bars. And we're going to get into how we get the data, what that data means, and how we're able to measure that. But I just wanted to talk about the philosophical shift from counting up to counting down. And having this specific outcome measure that we're driving towards is a huge component of the work that we do and the way that we approach this complex challenge of homelessness. So it's all well and good to say that we want to end homelessness. Our team loves data. Obviously, as you could see, we were focused on that counting up, and now we're focused on getting to zero. But one of the first hurdles that we had to clear was just defining what we meant by ending homelessness in a community. And I think Keo sort of alluded to this at the beginning, where when we start to talk to people about the work that this organization does, a lot of people are like, how could you ever end homelessness? How would you even know if that's possible? How would you know if you did it? So we have two different definitions, one for veterans and one for chronic, and we focus on these two different populations of people experiencing homelessness. And for veterans, what we'll look at is the number of vets who are actively experiencing homelessness in your community on a given month. And if that number is lower than the average number of people that your community has housed in the past 6 months, we will say that you have ended veteran homelessness. It's a little bit wonky, and we totally appreciate that. And one of the reasons that it is a dynamic end zone, as I like to refer to it as, is because there's always going to be, I mean, I shouldn't say always, we would love for a world to exist where there aren't veterans who are entering into homelessness, but in the world that we live in now, there are people that are going to be entering into our system month over month. So essentially what we're saying here with this definition is not that you need to get to a hard zero, but that your system needs to be efficient enough to know who's coming into the system and to be able to house those folks within essentially 30 days so that they're not languishing in their experience of homelessness. So Keo, I just wanted to see if you wanted to add anything to this, since I know, nope, okay, great. So we have another definition for chronic homelessness. And a couple of slides ago, I mentioned that chronic homelessness is just a definition from the Department of Housing and Urban Development, which is utilized for folks that have experienced a continuous year of homelessness or 4 episodes within 3 years, and they also have a disabling condition. And the reason that I even go into that level of detail is because, unlike the functional zero definition for veterans, the definition for functional zero for chronic is a hard number. So every January, communities that receive funding from the Department of Housing and Urban Development are required to do something called a point in time count, which means that one night in January, or over the course of a couple of days, they go out and they count the number of people who are experiencing unsheltered and sheltered homelessness, and they roll that number up and they send it off to HUD. And the definition for ending chronic homelessness basically states that if the number of people in your community that experience chronic homelessness is less than 0.1% of that annual point in time count, or 3 people, then your community has ended chronic homelessness. So I think just 2 points to illustrate here. This is a hard definition, like I said. And the reason that that is true for chronic and not for veterans is because experiencing chronic homelessness is a function of a length of time, essentially. So if you have folks that are entering into homelessness and they're spending over a year in that experience of homelessness and your system is not able to house them, they're going to enter into chronic. But we're looking for systems to work such that nobody would ever end up experiencing that much time homeless before they were housed. So that's the hard definition. The reason that we have 3 people, that or 3 people, is because in very, very, very large cities, like in LA or also in New York, getting down to 0.1% of an individual PIC count would be I'm sorry, this is the other way around, actually. I'm just realizing it's 3 people in smaller cities and 0.1% of an individual PIC count in larger cities. So in most communities, we would say that you could get down to no more than 3 people who are experiencing homelessness for a year or more. In a big city like Los Angeles or New York City, where the PIC count is in the thousands, getting your system to a place where it could only have 0.1% of that individual PIC count of people experiencing chronic homelessness actually for us is a sign of a healthy system. And again, we're looking for a measure of a healthy system that can move people out of their experience of homelessness more quickly. Anything? Okay, great. So it's important to have your aim, which we like to think of as your North Star, which for us is ending homelessness for vets or for people experiencing chronic homelessness. It's important to have a way to measure whether or not you have achieved that aim. And then the other thing that we think is really critically important too is having key milestones toward ending homelessness. I think that it's really just like a roadmap that we offer to communities to say that in order for you to go from point A, which would be like entering into this work with us, to the end of the road, which is achieving functional zero, we think that there are some specific things that your community needs to do along the way. And I'm just going to walk you through them pretty quickly, and then we'll kind of delve into a little bit more what we mean by them in the coming slides. But first and foremost, you need to have will among your community leaders to do this. So again, homelessness is a complex challenge. No one actor can solve it by themselves, and you need to have a shared sense among the entities and the leaders in your community that ending homelessness is the thing that you want to do. And then you also need to make sure that there is agreement upon the aim and how you're going to measure that aim. We put this up front. We're just like, build the will among community leaders. This can often be one of the most challenging pieces of the work. And it is not something that you do at the beginning and then you put on the shelf and you walk away from. So it is the first step, and you are consistently building and maintaining will. The next step after that is getting what we call a real-time by name list. Ko is going to go into that in more detail, but essentially it means, like, do you have the data that allows you to understand the baseline of people experiencing homelessness in your community and the number from which you will measure reductions towards zero. Once you have that comprehensive list, we'll work with your community to start to drive those monthly reductions in your actively homeless number. Again, I'll let Ko speak a little bit more about this, but this is what I would think of as more like the truly like experimental phase of the work, where you're trying a lot of different things, you're responding to the emerging need around homelessness in your community, and you're really aiming to drive down that actively homeless number month over month. The next step is achieving that measurable zero in your community. So did you reduce your actively homeless number to meet the definitions that I just walked through? And then do you have a system in place that not only will allow you to get across that finish line to zero, but to really sustain those gains? We've seen communities that can sprint to the finish line, but what we're actually interested in is getting across that finish line and staying there.
Okay. Are you ready for me to tag in?
I'm ready.
Okay. I'm going to talk through the middle phases that Andi just went through. And the first one is building a by name list. So once you've got consensus, once your leaders have all come together and said, yes, this is the thing we want to do, here's the aim we want to work on together, the first thing that we do with Built for Zero is actually move you through building a by name list. And a by name list is exactly what it sounds like. It is a list of people experiencing homelessness, and it is written out by name. So unlike a pit count, which is just numbers where we're physically like counting people once a year, a by name list is a list of everyone experiencing it with a lot of other data points. And we do scorecards with communities, and there are more than just 4 questions, but they do kind of break out across these 4 themes. The first is full coverage, which basically just means that every person experiencing homelessness in a given community has a way to be listed on that list. And that means that all agencies and programs that work with people experiencing homelessness are contributing and reviewing information on a regular basis. And it also means that we're going out and looking for people on the off chance that they're not coming into a program, right? But no matter what, everyone experiencing the problem is like covered. The second is that we don't just have a name or a number. There's actually a lot of person level information about each of those people. And I'll talk more about why that's important a little later. But basically it means that we have your name, we have a lot of identifying information about you. We also know a lot about your health and housing needs, so that the list actually becomes in service of helping you resolve your homelessness instead of just a way of us knowing a static number. The third piece is that the information is accurate and up to date, which means that you're not just creating a list, putting someone on there, and then letting them languish for forever. We're actually constantly encouraging communities to be updating that information. You have to update it at least monthly. Most communities now are updating it bi-weekly, weekly, and in the sophisticated communities, they're updating it every day. I think once you get into the habit of doing this, it becomes much less work to update it daily. Just like, I don't know if you guys are doing expense reports, but just the things that pile up, the work that piles up, like if you don't do your reading on a daily basis, and then all of a sudden right before you have to write a paper, you're stuck reading like 3 books when you could have just been reading them night after night. So most communities are updating that data really regularly. And then this fourth bucket about reliability is really, for us, a way of using data to guarantee that the information that is on your by name list is actually it's actually accurate. The scorecard is all self-assessment. So we're asking communities questions and they're answering us yes, no, or giving us percentages. And then it isn't until the end that we're actually able to see if those numbers balance. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a second. The reason we do this though, is that if you have a list that has all of these components, first of all, you're able to triage really well. One thing that is consistent across all communities is that they have super limited resources to serve folks who are experiencing homelessness. And if you're not using those resources as smartly as possible, you're going to run out of them really, really quickly. In the same way that hospitals wouldn't, and they don't, just do MRIs on every single person who comes into the building, we're also encouraging communities to use their list as a way to make sure that they're pairing individuals with exactly what they need. Not every person experiencing homelessness needs a full housing subsidy and wraparound case management for the rest of their lives. Some people do. We want to make sure that we're pairing resources with individuals. The second component to that is that it allows you to advocate for more or less resources based on who is actually in your system. Most of the time, this means that you're advocating for more of a certain type of resource, but there are some instances in which we've seen communities have too much of a certain kind of resource. And because they have very, very detailed information on exactly who in their community is experiencing homelessness, they're able to trade in things or to make a case for why they need more of one thing and less of another. And then the last piece is about improved systems. I'm going to speak a lot about this when we talk about reductions, but just like advocating for resources, the more information you know about the people in your system, the better you are able to actually make improvements where improvements will make a difference. And like I said, I'll talk more about that. That really is the work of Reduce, but without this information on your by name list, it's really, really hard to target your improvements. So I spend a lot of time working with communities that are in the reduce phase, and it becomes very, very clear when they have like not gotten their by name list quite as tight as they should have before they came into the reduce phase, and you can often see that pretty quickly. These are the data points we get from communities on a monthly basis. I'll talk you through it. It's a little bit overwhelming if you don't know what you're looking at, but each month they submit to us 7 data points. And the first one that I'm going to talk about is active homeless. Those are the green folks in the middle. So if I am New York's data lead, I will submit to Built for Zero the total number of, let's just say veterans for the sake of this exercise, the total number of veterans experiencing homelessness as of March 31st, right? We give them a couple of weeks to get their data in order, but it's always on the last day of the month, how many vets were in your system. And then that's the only static number we ask for. From there, we ask you to look back over the past month and kind of think about the number of people who moved out and the number of people who moved in. So if you look over to the right, for outflow, we then ask you to consider how many people left your system over the entire month of March. So there are 3 categories that make up outflow. The first is housing placements. How many people moved from being homeless to actually being in permanent housing? The second, those gray men, are folks who've moved to inactive. Inactive essentially means that you used to be in the system and we've looked for you for a given period. It's normally 2 to 3 months and we haven't been able to find you, which leads us to believe that either you left town or you resolved your homelessness on your own. And it's important that we have an established threshold for when to pull those folks off, because at some point it stops being useful for our outreach teams to constantly be looking for people who have resolved their own homelessness. So we have a category for how those people would come off your list. The third category of outflow doesn't get used very often in veterans. It tends to be more of a chronic number, but it no longer meets population criteria. On the rare occasion that someone came into your system, you thought they were a veteran, and then you found out they weren't, we have a way for you to categorize those folks so that your numbers balance. And then we do the same thing with inflow. So there are 3 categories of people who can come into your system. Those maroon folks are the ones who are new to your system, which means they've never experienced homelessness before in your community. The red folks are people who've gone through your system before, they've been placed into housing, and now they're back. And then the third are people who've returned from inactive. So they were on your list, they went missing, they either self-resolved or they moved out of town, and now they're back. So you've seen them before, but they're not falling out of housing necessarily. And the reason we ask for this information is because we need some insight into how to help you target your improvement efforts. And this is really the work of the reduce bucket, is like, how do you use this information? And I will say, before I go on to the next slide, that when we first started out pulling information with Built for Zero, we were looking just at active homeless number inflow and outflow. And the evolution of these categories has been pretty continuous since, I don't know, 2015, is that right? Yeah, they've gotten more and more sophisticated as we've learned more and more about the system, which is a good example of us taking our own medicine, you know, like do it as well as you can in the beginning and then improve it as you learn more. So once you actually have all of that information, we move you into the reduce bucket. Before I talk about that a little bit, I will say that these data points, in order to know if your system is performing the way we hope it's performing, we expect to see the change in your active homeless number month to month bear some relation to the net change between inflow and outflow, which is a really fancy way of saying, like, when you go to your bank account, you expect your account balance to be an accurate representation of your deposits and withdrawals. You know, you expect those two things to equal the same thing. And before you move into the reduce bucket, we actually have you demonstrate that your system measures can do that, so that we can see like where you may need some tightening. Once you get into the reduce bucket, and I don't know why we call them buckets, but once you've moved out of by name list, you move into a category called reduce. And once you're in reduce, you're doing exactly that. It's taking the data that you have and using it to drive your progress towards functional zero. That's not to say you're not doing that before you get to this phase, but this is the phase where we really, really focus on improvement. And the way that we do that is by setting you up against your own performance measures. So right in the center of this graph, you'll see what is called an improvement median. We're constantly working with medians because we want teams to improve against their own progress. So the median is just the point that is the middle point in your performance. So half of your data points are above it and half of your data points are below it. And we choose that because what we're hoping for, and what you can see that Montgomery County has done in this yellow box, is that they have gotten 6 data points below their improvement median, which means that their improvement is against their own ability, right? So once they've done that, we take that as an indicator that something in their system has shifted, because for 6 months in a row, they have outperformed their own system. Once you've done that, we then actually set you up with a new improvement median. And if you see down here on the bottom, that's that new median that we've drawn. And Montgomery County is amazing because they've actually got 2 full system shifts. They now have a second shift against their brand new median. Part of the reason for this is that it allows some flexibility. We don't need to see data points constantly going down. Homelessness is complex, and some months we see more people than others, but we are looking to see communities make improvements against what they are able to do. And medians have allowed us the flexibility to see when that's true. The second thing, this is the high level idea that reduced teams are working towards. What that actually means when you have a coach, though, is that we look at your inflow and outflow data in order to help you make decisions about where you might want to focus. And this is the experimental work that I would say probably 70% of our coaching focuses on, is like how to help communities make decisions about where they should be focusing their efforts. We have a lot of charts like this where we're mapping different inflow. This is inflow data from a community. And what you'll see is that the bulk of folks are newly identified. That's that dark purple line. There are some folks, the middle dark purple line are return from housing. The the return from inactive folks are almost non-existent. And the reason we look at this information is to help communities understand that if they want to make an impact in like seeing their inflow data go down, is they really should be focusing either on newly identified or returns from housing, trying to go out and continue to prevent people who once were inactive from coming back into the system is not a good use of their time. And honestly, until these last few data points, neither was focusing too much attention on keeping people in housing, right? If I were working with this community, right around the time that they started to see the uptick in housing, that's when I would start focusing some efforts on like stabilizing folks if they needed it. That's when we'd start looking into it. Otherwise, all of our efforts are on newly identified folks. And this has been really, really helpful in our coaching, having communities have accurate data here, because we all have stories about what the problems are that we need to be solving. And having very specific data that can show you where there are opportunities for improvement has been like just a really, really incredible force in helping communities pick the types of projects they want to work on. It settles a lot of discussions. The next thing that I just want to talk through, Andi talked a little bit about this when she showed you the definitions, but I wanted to show you what it actually looks like when a community achieves functional zero. So this orange line right here is the chronic functional zero threshold of 3. This is information from Bergen County, New Jersey. They had 5, 5, 4, dipped down to 2, and then they held it at 1 or 0 for, what is that, a year and a half? And Andi's going to talk a little bit more about sustainability later, but this is actually, our work seems for the most part focused on ending homelessness, and the work is truly about sustaining homelessness. Like, an end to homelessness means nothing if it's not something you can hit and hold. And I will say that sustaining, I think, is more difficult than achieving. It's all the same work without a lot of the adrenaline, because you feel like you've crossed the finish line and then you just have to keep that pace for a really long time. Andi, is there anything else you would say about the slide before I go on? Okay. And then this is just the same slide about chronic homelessness. And I actually am going to skip on because we're going to talk a little bit more about system costs later on. And I know we've got a little bit more we have to get through before we talk about system costs. Andi, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. We have a lot of tools that we use for solving complex problems when we work with communities. For the most part, everything that I just talked about in By Name List and Reduce was focused on data for improvement. Like, how are you using the information you have about your system in order to inform the work that you're taking on? But there are other sections, and I'm going to turn it over to Andi to talk about the other 3.
Yeah, thank you, Kao. So I think one of the things that feels cool is like Kao really walked you through like the mechanics, you know, and like how we measure and the different phases of the work. And I think that what we believe as an organization and as an initiative is that there are certain tools, and I'll get into some mindsets that kind of underpin like the mechanics of how we do the work. So Kao mentioned data for improvement, which she really just walked us through. I just want to touch on 3 more that we kind of call our like tools for solving these complex challenges. So after data for improvement, we have human-centered design. I imagine folks on this call are familiar with that concept, but what that means in the context of the Built for Zero work is that like we're designing systems to end people's experience of homelessness. Have we gone to the end user to talk to them about what it's like to move through that system? Do we understand their experience? Are we getting feedback from the people who are actually experiencing the problem themselves around what our system needs to do in order to be effective? And I've worked on a series of projects recently that we'll get into in a little bit, where human-centered design has been a hugely important focus, where we're not only asking people, hey, like, what is your experience, but do you have some ideas about how we might improve the system that you are all moving through right now? Facilitation and meeting design, I mean, I usually say that that's just kind of like a fancy way of like, are we using our in-person time effectively? So I think Kao kind of touched upon this when she was like, if I was a communities coach and we were looking at these inflow numbers, like how would I get people to agree on the kind of work that we would need to do? So multiple actors, again, for solving complex problems. Are we using our time effectively? Are we able to make agreements on what our next steps need to be coming out of that movie? And do we have space for folks to innovate and to do so collaboratively so that we are rowing in the same direction? And we think that that is truly key to this work of solving the complex problem of homelessness. And then quality improvement. I like to think of quality improvement as somewhat of a container for sort of the other pieces, these other tools that we just talked about. And quality improvement is really just a discipline that basically says, before you go and make a sweeping change to your system, why don't we test something on a small scale first to see if it delivers the predicted impact that we think it's going to have? Let's study the impact, the effects of that test. Did it render the results that we thought it was going to have? Was the test actually implemented the way that we thought it was going to be implemented? What have we learned about that? And should we scale to a slightly larger testing ground, if you will, or should we go back to the table? And basically, like I said, it's just a way to introduce improvements in a small sort of contained space and understand if they're achieving the impact that we want them to do before we kind of go and make a sweeping change to our system. So on the next slide, I just want to, this is really connected to quality improvement. So actually, sometimes we'll refer to this slide as like the model for doing that quality improvement work. You'll see all the way over on your left in that green box, we have the question, what are we trying to accomplish? That is your aim. So again, we've talked about needing to build will and commitment to an aim. And that aim should be driving all of the work that we are doing. So in this instance, if the work that we're doing is not connected to ending homelessness, we should not be doing that work. If you move over to the blue box, that's going to get into how are we going to measure if what we're doing is actually moving the needle towards our aim. So how are we going to know that any change that we make to our system is an improvement? We're going to sit down and we're actually going to talk about what those measures are. Kao just walked you through the data that a by name, the data that a by name list yields. And, you know, overall, at like a very high level, we're looking to see those actively homeless numbers reduce month over month. So if we're doing work that isn't rendering a reduction in our actively homeless number that is driving us towards functional zero, we're probably not doing the right work. And in the orange box, we're going to get just a little bit more detailed here about, okay, that's great. We know what we're trying to do. We know how we're going to measure if that is happening, but what changes can we make that will result in an improvement? So if you go back to the inflow example where Kao was talking about, you know, the community that we looked at was having a spike in folks who were returning from housing towards the end of the month that we were looking at, the changes that you make that might result in an improvement could be something like focusing on retention in housing by having a case manager follow up with people in their unit 3 times a week instead of twice a week. And then all the way over to the right would be that plan, do, study, act, which is just the way that we want to do the testing. So if we're going to ask people to go out and add 1 additional round of check-ins as a case manager, we want to actually know if that thing is going to lead to the reductions in people who are returning to homelessness from falling out of housing. And we're also making like a big ask of someone's time. So what we're going to tell the case managers is, hey, we have a plan. We're going to do this for 1 week at 1 permanent supportive housing site. You're going to go out and see if it stabilizes folks in housing. And we're going to hit pause after that week, come back, talk about what that process was like. Did we actually test it the way we thought we were going to? Did it make people feel more stable in housing? If the answer is yes, then maybe what we do is have people check in 3 times a week for the course of a month and see if that is actually making it such that fewer people are entering into homelessness from returns from housing in the following month. So it's just a way to operationalize these tests. And that's kind of the heart and soul of QI. So those are the tools, but we also think that there are some mindsets or philosophies really that need to come along with the tools. So as we talked about, you know, homelessness is a complex social problem, or a wicked problem, as I saw someone type into the chat box. And we need to be flexible and adaptable as we pursue it. So we've got 3 mindsets that we really like to speak about. The first is a growth mindset, which when it boils down to it, we might not yet know how to solve the problem, but it doesn't mean we can't figure it out. And I'll go a little bit more into each of these, but we'll just give you a quick overview here. The next one is embracing failing forward. So a lot of this work is testing, right? Like, we need to just test the hypothesis. We cannot let perfect be the enemy of good enough. So test something, fail quickly, do it over the course of 1 week. And if you find that the thing that you tested did not yield the result that you want, then you can iterate on that. That failure is actually really, really useful information. And you can improve based on what you learned by doing that test. And then we also have a bias towards action. So basically that means that, like, you just got to do something. Remember, life is what happens when we're busy making 10-year plans to end homelessness. And these 10-year plans were sort of like a staple in our sector for a long time. And so you would write the plan, and then you would put the plan on the shelf, and you really wouldn't be doing anything. And so we believe that you just have to start. So the growth mindset actually comes from Carol Dweck, and it's out of the education sector. And there's some really great, like, TED Talks out there that folks can look at if they haven't seen. But basically, it will touch upon research that bears the thinking out that, like, if you believe that you can learn something, it makes you significantly more likely to actually be able to learn that thing. And Carol Dweck did some research with, I want to say 8th graders around math, but please don't quote me on that. And I definitely recommend that you check out those TED Talks. But that simply by having the mindset that even if you don't know something yet, you can learn it, is in and of itself useful and important for being able to do the thing that you're setting forward to do. So embracing failing forward, the example that we like to give here is, like, I don't know if anybody on this call has children, but if you do, could you imagine if the first time your kids set out to walk, they weren't able to execute on walking, they fell over, and then you were like, all right, well, I guess that just means that you're not going to be a walker. Or would we say to that kid, good job, nice try, get up and try it again? And that's what we think about for failing forward. And I think the concept of failing can sometimes seem just really, you know, transparently, quite frankly, like, scary to engage with. So the other way that you can think about this is, like, are we willing to learn from what we're trying? And that's just another way that you could sort of approach this concept of just, like, trying something. If it didn't work, using that as information to improve upon and move forward. And then the last mindset that we have, again, is just that bias towards action. So I think I'll just say right now our team is deep in the work of supporting our communities as they respond to COVID-19. And I am feeling very grateful that we have a bias towards action on our team. Essentially, we're just saying we need to support communities now, and we're going to use that phrase that feels so familiar sometimes, build the plane while flying it. But that if we were to sit around and make a plan for a month and a half about how we're going to respond, all the information that we would have would essentially be out of date. And so we just need to be comfortable with just doing the thing and trying to solve the complex problems. Okay, was there anything that you would add before I take us back?
I would actually say that you may have noticed that, like, a lot of these tools are actually about working with people. I think that is one of the things that has made Built for Zero so successful has been its ability to use and drive action with data. But there's a huge component that is about acknowledging that these systems are made up of people and figuring out how to help people make decisions to improve their systems. That's all. Otherwise, I think
that's great. Thanks. And so I just want to pivot us back to this concept of sustainability, which is perhaps the bulk of the work of Built for Zero, as Keo was saying. So just a working definition here for what we mean by sustainability. So these should look somewhat familiar. They are related to the definitions of functional zero. So for veterans, it's when your actively homeless veteran number is below that 6-month average housing placement threshold. We would say that you achieved functional zero, and then we need to see your community essentially hold that success over the course of the coming months. So you cross the finish line. It's like Keo said earlier, it's less adrenaline inducing, maybe less exciting, but we're basically looking to see if the system is different. The system has performed different in the past. Is the system set up to sustain those gains over time? And it's the same for chronic. You cross that threshold, and now we're going to ask you to hold the line like Bergen County did and has been doing past 2018. So I think like that's all well and good that we have like what it means to sustain your gains, but I feel like the thing that is truly important is understanding like why it is so important to study sustainability in our communities. So we've talked a little bit about the different types of resources that it might take to end homelessness in a community based on the population that you're focused on and where you are in your journey. Sustainability is no different. So your community might get across the finish line and you had a bunch of resources that were for housing people experiencing chronic homelessness, and now you have public figures and people making funding decisions seeing that, okay, you achieved that, you did it, you housed all those people, but there's different types of investments then that might be needed to maintain an end to homelessness over time. So perhaps you don't need that housing resource anymore, but you might be needing funding for different positions. You might be needing to look at funding for, to the next bullet point, tamping down inflow in your community. And so it's just really important to be able to articulate the different type of investments that you need in a community now that you have started to enter that sustaining phase. The other thing that and I just have inflow on the brain all the time. Most of my projects are around inflow, but homelessness is dynamic, right? So Keo walked us through those different by name list data pieces. You've got the actively homeless number and you've got people who are exiting, but you also have people who are entering. And when you think about sustaining, the focus has to be on folks who are entering into homelessness. Because if it wasn't a dynamic problem and there weren't 6 more people at the front door after you housed the 6 people that were in your system in the past month, like that sustainability would be so easy, but it really forces us to grapple with some questions that actually the homelessness system has little control over sometimes, which is like, where are folks coming from? And who else in our community outside of the homeless and serving sector do we need to be engaging in conversations about sustainability? The other thing that sustainability is really important for is that it, so when we work with communities, they start with one population, so vets or people experiencing chronic homelessness, and they cross that finish line for functional zero for vets, and then they start to work on chronic. And you could imagine a world in which people are now diverting their attention to focusing on chronic homelessness, and so your veteran number is like ticking up again. And the reason sustainability matters here is because we're asking your system to hold that line for vets while you're also working on the chronic population. And we now have some communities that are working on youth and families as well, and it's the same thing. They're trying to hold the gains for functional zero for vets and chronic while figuring out what's applicable from their system changing work that could support the work to end youth and families and what's different. And if we didn't ask people to hold that sustaining threshold, then some of those questions would just be rendered unimportant. And then I think the other thing, and this feels like really just like some of the crux of the work, and it is what Keo started the top of the presentation with, which is just like sustainability helps create a belief in the general public that an end to homelessness is really possible. So if you just hit that once, in your community, but then the number of veterans experiencing homelessness went on the rise. Like, I mean, why would people believe that an end is possible? So again, it's not just building the system to end it, it's building the system to sustain that end over time. Keo, is there anything you'd add there?
No, I think also we may need to open it up for questions. We maybe need to skip this last one.
Oh, sure. Yeah, we could skip the last one. Let's open it up for questions. Sorry, we could talk all day.
Actually.
Let's do questions if we are ready.